Hey, 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 good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to Now TV. This is Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and I just can't tell you how much I appreciate you being with me. As I expressed last week, I do appreciate the fact that I'm beginning to hear from more and more of you. Uh, this program is not only is it being aired in Africa and India, I believe India, and a host of countries, a host of stations, but I also air it on YouTube. And so uh, the fact is that what's happening is that a lot of you, now, is it thousands upon thousands upon thousands? No. But a lot of you are tuning in to watch morning musings on Fridays on Now TV. And the comments that I'm hearing are wonderful. And so, again, I want to thank you for that. It's always gratifying to know that people they're watching, they're listening, and most of all, they're studying. And, obviously we have detractors, but that's part of life. And what's revealing, of course, is that when the detractors appear, so often they're really caustic, they're hateful, they call names, and they don't even offer biblical, exegetical, hermeneutically sound, or logical arguments. They just make bold claims, and they slander, and they misrepresent, and what have you. And that tells you a whole lot right there, folks. When a person is so threatened by a doctrine that they feel that the only way they can answer it is to act in an ungodly, hateful, hate-filled, expletive-filled at times attack and diatribe, that tells you they know that their views are in trouble. Okay, enough of that. Thanks again for joining me on this morning's Morning Musings. We are continuing our study of the challenge of Christ. Now, I don't know about you. Well, actually, I do to a certain extent. But I'm really, really, really enjoying developing for you how we, as believers, can answer the challenge of Christ. The challenge of Christ is very clear, it's very explicit, and it's very powerful. Jesus said, John 10:37 and following, "Do not believe me for my word's sake. Believe me for my works. If I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me." I've shared with you before that one of the works that the Father gave the Son, which is the very foundation of any and all faith in Jesus. Jesus said he was going to go to Jerusalem, be betrayed, be crucified, be buried, and raise himself from the dead the third day. And Paul said, if Christ is not risen, our faith is in vain. There is no Christianity without the resurrection of Jesus, ladies and gentlemen. That's how important the challenge of Christ is. Did he do what he said he was going to do? There are some, amazingly, who claim to be Christians. I've got a really scholarly book laying over here on my desk, or at least it was. I don't see it now. Anyway, in which a very prominent female Bible scholar takes the position that Jesus was not literally raised from the dead. But he was in the mind of the apostles. He was in the mind of the first century church. It's a doctrine that they just invented. No, folks, that's what you call cognitive dissonance. When you know something is not true, but you keep saying it's true anyway, that's cognitive dissonance. Those people knew. They believed with all of their heart, and they put their lives on the line. for the belief that Jesus truly was actually physically raised from the dead. And yet then, the great paradox of Christianity, the great dilemma of Christianity, is that the church for 2,000 years has failed to address the subject of eschatology in any substantive, I would even go so far as to say, any academic, any systematic way. Did you know that although most of the major creeds say something about eschatology, that is, they affirm a belief in the coming of the Lord, judgment, resurrection. Did you know that no major creed systematically addresses the subject of eschatology? Now, they talk about soteriology, and they talk about pneumatology, and they talk about Christology. Look, they spend tons of time on ecclesiology. What is the church? How is it organized? What does the church do? Et cetera, et cetera. Not one major creed systematically, comprehensively discusses eschatology. You know why? Because as Richard Bauckham, noted modern-day scholar, says, from the earliest days, there was a crisis of faith in the early church, beginning at a very early stage after AD 70, in which the early writers, Christian writers, expressed disappointment, discouragement even, that the Lord had not come. They even pointed back to AD 70 as the time when it was supposed to come. Why hadn't he come? Do you see how important the challenge of Christ is, ladies and gentlemen? We must deal with the challenge of Christ. We are living in a hostile environment in which the world, in which society is hostile toward Christianity, in which the Jews and the Muslims, the atheists, agnostics, etc., are on the constant attack, and one of their venues of attack is Jesus said he was coming back in the first century. He did not do it. Your Jesus failed. And what is deeply, deeply troubling, as I shared with you recently, is that I have challenged, and I continue to challenge, people who call themselves Christians, and yet they openly say, no, Jesus did not come back like he said he would. Folks, does that not bother you? If it doesn't, it should absolutely shake you. It should grab hold of you, and just shake you and rattle you. And it should make you determined to be able to answer the challenge of Christ. So, I've been sharing with you for well over a year now how to answer the challenge of Christ, to demonstrate and to show Jesus never, ever, ever said he was coming back on a literal physical cloud as a 5'5" Jewish man at the end of human history. Never said it. Now look, if we approach the text in a Western, Grecian, Occidental, not accidental, but Occidental mindset of wooden literalism, well, yeah, we could make the text say that. But as I've shared with you before, and it's so critical to understand, the Bible was not written by Greeks to Greeks. It was written by Jews, primarily to Jews, with the exceptions of Ephesians and Colossians. And it was written about God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel, teaching over and over and over and over again that Jesus was going to come as the Father had come many times in the Old Testament. Now don't forget, I've written a book like Father, like Son, on clouds of glory. This book is one of the most definitive and systematic studies of the nature and definition of the coming of the Lord. If you will go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, go to the bookstore and just do a search like Father, like Son. Order the book, send me a note that says you saw the offer on Now TV, and I will refund your shipping and save you $5. Okay? Take advantage of this special offer. Now, what I've been sharing with you as an answer to the challenge of Christ is that 2 Peter chapter 3, which has often been seen as a definitive proof that the Bible does predict an end of time, the end of the current Christian age. Oh, I just got to remind you, okay? Just have to remind you, the Christian age, the age in which we're living now, has no end. Hey, look, if the Christian age has no end, guess what? Then we're not looking for the end of this age. Hello? See how simple that is? I mean, it's simple, but it's profound. Okay, to go on. So, I've shared with you how 2 Peter predicted the last days. They were already in it. According to 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 20, Christ had appeared in the last times. Christ appeared in the last days. Hebrews 1 and 2. So Christ had appeared in the last days, and Peter said that his prophecy of the day of the Lord, the last days, day of the Lord, in which the Lord would come to destroy creation, was from the Old Testament. I have spent considerable time now demonstrating for you and with you that Isaiah chapters 2 through 5 is an Old Testament prophecy, number one, of the last days. Number two, the last days, day of the Lord. Number three, the last days, day of the Lord, in which the Lord would come and shake the earth mightily. That's the destruction of creation. Okay? I've then shared with you, and I spent the entire program last week showing you the parallelisms between Isaiah 2, Luke 23, 28 to 31, Matthew 23, 29 and following, 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, and Revelation chapter 6. So I'm not going to rehearse that because it takes a little bit of time. What I want to do, to continue to do right now, is to show you that Isaiah chapter 2 foretold, according to Jesus, foretold the Jewish war. Now, by the way, a good friend of mine by the name of Gerald Davis, he's a really, really excellent Bible scholar. I appreciate him so very, very much. He very often corrects me when I mess up when I say something that's not accurate. Well, here's the deal. In Isaiah 3:25, it says, "Your men," New King James translation, "your men shall fall by the edge of the sword in the war." Well, you know what? I didn't check the Septuagint. Should have, but I didn't. And the Septuagint of Isaiah chapter 3:25 reads like this. "And thy most beautiful son, whom thou lovest, shall fall by the sword, and your mighty men shall fall by the sword, and shall be brought low." Well, see, it doesn't say your men shall fall by the edge of the sword in, quote, the war. So I inappropriately took the New King James translation and the reference to, quote, the war. The fact that the term "the war" does not appear in Isaiah 3:25 is, however, not absolutely definitive. Why do I say that? I say that because Jesus, in Luke chapter 21, in predicting, quote, the war of AD 66 to 70, and by the way, there are very, 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 very few commentators who disagree with that. So here we have Jesus in Luke 21, 20 to 24, speaking of the coming Jewish war. And in Luke 21 and 24, Jesus directly refers to cites from even the Septuagint of Isaiah 3:24. So once again, the term "the war" does not appear in the Septuagint or in the Masoretic text either, according to my friend Gerald Davis. That doesn't mean, however, that he was not referring to the war. And that's true because Jesus applies Isaiah 3:25 to the coming Jewish war. Now, it is in fact an insertion into the text to insert the war. But the conflation of Isaiah 3:25 with Luke 21:24 gives theological justification, not textual, theological justification for seeing that Isaiah is indeed speaking of the war of AD 70, because once again, Jesus quotes, cites, alludes, and applies Isaiah 3:25 to the coming Jewish the war. What I then shared with you is that Isaiah was predicting the day of the Lord at the time of the war, when Israel's men would fall by the edge of the sword. And that day of the Lord, remember, is a time when men could run to the hills, hide in the caves, cry to the rocks, fall on us. I've shared with you repeatedly how Revelation chapter 6 directly quotes from those verses. In order to predict, this is where I want to spend the rest of my time today, in order to directly predict the great day of His, that is, God's wrath. Now remember, Revelation 6, 12 to 17 is heaven's answer to the prayer of the martyrs who want vindication and they want vengeance on those on the earth who killed them. And they were promised that relief in a very little while. Revelation 6, verse 11. I've shared with you from 1 Peter chapter 1 the parallel. Vindication and salvation was coming in a little while for those suffering for the cause of Christ. Now, watch this. The men who would flee from the day of the Lord by going to the mountains, hiding in the caves, etc., they would do that. Why? Because the Greek word at the beginning of verse 17 tells us why they would go and run to the mountains, hide in the caves, cry to the rocks, fall on us. They would run from the day of the Lord because the great day of His wrath has come. Now notice, who is able to stand? Now it's really, really fascinating to realize that this terminology of not being able to stand, and by the way, I'm turning now to the book of Lamentations. When was the last time you read Lamentations, by the way? You really, really, really ought to spend some time there. In my book, Who is This Babylon?, I adduce some 22 direct parallels between the book of Lamentations and the book of Revelation. Not Revelations, Revelation. Those parallels are absolutely incredible. Many of them are just, they're almost verbatim. Now watch this in Lamentations. And what is Lamentations? Lamentations was written by Jeremiah immediately following the destruction of Jerusalem in BC 586 BC at the hands of the Chaldeans, the Babylonians. He considered the ruins of Jerusalem. And notice what he says. How the Lord has covered the daughter of Zion with a cloud in His anger. He cast down from heaven to the earth the beauty of Israel. And he did not remember his footstool, now watch this, in the day of his anger. So, the destruction of Jerusalem in BC 586 was what? The day of God's wrath, the day of God's anger. Why? Well, because according to Jeremiah chapter 2, according to Jeremiah chapter 6, according to Jeremiah chapter 7, Jerusalem and the Jews were guilty of the very worst of heinous immorality, cruelty, and injustice. You ought to read Jeremiah chapter 7. And the Lord says, how is it that you come to this house, you come to this place, which is called by my name, and you say, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord are these, and you think that you can lie, you can steal, you can commit adultery, you can commit idolatry, you can even commit murder, and say, we are saved to do all of these things. You see, they thought simply because they had the temple, they thought that simply because they were called the people of God, gave them license to do anything they wanted to. And God said, no, that's wrong. And so the Lord said, if you will thoroughly amend your ways and your doings, if you will show mercy to the widow and to the orphan, if you'll show no favoritism, I will cause you to dwell in this place. If not, I will utterly destroy you and remove you from this place. See, the people of Jeremiah's day thought wearing a name ensured salvation. Having been given the law ensured security. They thought they couldn't fall from God's favor. And they were wrong. Anyway, to continue. Now notice this. Revelation chapter 6 is about the great day of God's wrath. And notice what he says. Who can stand? Folks, listen to me. Pay very careful attention. And please catch the power of this. This is, virtually all commentators agree, all right? This is a direct echo of Malachi chapter 3. Now I'm going to turn back there. And I'm going to read this because I don't want you to miss the power of this. Malachi chapter 3. Behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight. Behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. But who can endure the day of his coming? Who can stand when he appears? Now, here's what you need to understand from this passage. Malachi chapter 3 was predicting two things, two messengers. Number one, the messenger that we call John the Baptizer. He shall prepare the way before me, said the Lord. And then the Lord whom you seek shall come suddenly to his temple. And when he appears, who shall be able to stand? See? Revelation 6:12. So here is John in the book of Revelation, quoting from Malachi chapter 3. And listen, from Malachi chapter 3 until the book of Revelation, there was no coming of the Lord to his temple in fulfillment of the message of the messenger, i.e. John the Baptizer. The messenger, John the Baptizer was this messenger, according to Mark 1:1-3. And so, and by the way, we know that because John himself said, when the Pharisees went out and asked him, who are you? Are you the Messiah? No. Are you Elijah? No. That is, he wasn't literal, physical Elijah resurrected and reappeared. But he said, well, and so they said, well, who in the world are you? I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness. Prepare ye the way of the Lord. He was the messenger of Isaiah 40 and Malachi chapter 3. So, here's the messenger of Malachi chapter 3, John the Baptizer, heralding the coming of the Lord to his temple when no one would be able to stand. Now, here's what you got to see about this. In Malachi chapter 3, I'm going to begin reading with verse 4. Then, that's the time of this coming of the Lord. Then the offering of Judah and Jerusalem will be pleasant to the Lord, as in the days of old, as in the former years. And I will come near to you in judgment. This is the coming of the Lord, to be heralded and to be proclaimed and to be prepared for by John as the messenger. I will come near you for judgment. I will be a swift witness against sorcerers and against adulterers, against perjurers, against those who exploit wage earners and widows and orphans, and against those who turn away the alien, because they do not fear me, says the Lord. Now here, look, you got to see this, and I'm almost out of time. What is happening here in verses 5 and 6, or verses 4 and 5, is a prediction of the fulfillment of Exodus chapter 22 and Deuteronomy 27, 19 and following. Because you see, each of these sins is spoken of in the Torah, Exodus, Deuteronomy. And the Lord said in Exodus and Deuteronomy that when Israel committed those sins, he would bring his sword against them in national judgment. So, here is John in Revelation predicting the fulfillment of Malachi chapter 3, which was to be the fulfillment of John's message. And John said, that was at hand. Now look, I'm going to continue this next week, but for right now, I'm out of time. I'll see you next week.